The CIA killed JFK, AIDS was invented to carry out science experiments, the moon landing was a hoax. Long before there was an internet, there were conspiracy theories, neatly bundled stories to explain events that are hard to swallow. So why does a new survey show that a growing number of French citizens believe in them? Call it one of the unintended consequences of a better connected world. It's now much easier to relay conspiracy theories, theories that thrive thanks to an element of truth and a dangerous dose of paranoia. Extremists of various stripes love them because even when there's no proof, they can always claim it's because there's a cover-up. Is it up to citizens to sort the wheat from the chaff, or does the state get involved? Like last week when French President Emmanuel Macron promised a bill to crack down on fake news. Is the onus on government regulators? Is it on internet giants? Is it on parents? Today in the France 24 debate, the conspiracy theory phenomenon. With us to talk about it, Davina Frau Meggs, who teaches media sociology at the University of Paris Sorbonne Nouvelle, a member of the European Commission's ad hoc panel on fake news. Thank you for being with us. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you, too.
Happy New Year as well to Adrian Covington, co-director of the American section of the Lycée International in Saint-Germain-en-Laye.
Yes. Hi. Good evening.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Fresh from New York, sociologist Greg Smith-Simon, the author of Cause and How It Doesn't Always Equal Effect. Thanks for joining us.
Very nice to be here.
Are there alligators in the sewer in New York City?
And I brought some with me.
All right. And Fabrice Epelmois, who lectures at the prestigious French Political Science Institute Sciences Po on information warfare and is the co-founder of Yogo Shah, Internet Security Consultants.
Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yes, the Earth is flat, or at least that's what 9% of the French think, according to that poll. Brian Quinn has more.
Mind control chemicals in airplane exhaust. The 9/11 attacks, an inside job. Conspiracy theories, often considered well outside the mainstream of public discourse, but for the French, apparently commonly held.
I think maybe the Islamic State group was financed by the government.
With those missing flights, Malaysian Airlines, etc., I'm sure it's all some kind of conspiracy. I looked into it. The airplanes, the routes, I think it's all planned out. There's a lot they're hiding from us.
A new survey with over 1,200 respondents has revealed that some 79% of French people subscribe to at least one conspiracy theory. Among the most common, 55% believe that France's health ministry has conspired with the pharmaceutical industry to hide the dangers of vaccines. 54% believe that U.S. President John F. Kennedy was killed by the CIA. 16% believe the U.S. faked the Apollo 11 moon landing, and 9% apparently believe it's possible the world is flat. Fully 1/4 of the survey's respondents believe in 7 or more conspiracy theories. And it's the young who are most susceptible to such beliefs, roughly 21% of 18 to 34-year-olds, far more than their older co-citizens. Also associated, populist politics. In France's most recent presidential election, hardcore conspiracy theorists were far more likely to vote for far-right candidate Marine Le Pen or far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon than for centrist Emmanuel Macron. Of course, the French aren't alone, with recent studies showing roughly half of Americans believing in at least one conspiracy theory as well. But with President Macron announcing his intentions to crack down on online disinformation and so-called fake news in 2018, it looks like he'll have his work cut out for him.
Adrian Covington, have you noticed a rise among your pupils in conspiracy theory believing?
Yeah. A rise, I'm not really sure, but I think what my colleagues and I have definitely noticed, and what we have to really do our best to keep a handle on, is the access that these young people have. I mean, we have to, first of all, remember that conspiracy theories, this actually is nothing new. I mean, my father has said that when he was growing up, they still believed that John Wilkes Booth had actually survived and was still alive somewhere. My generation is who really killed
The assassin
JFK.
of Lincoln.
Yeah, of Lincoln, sorry. But no, I think that what we really have to keep a handle on, those of us who work in schools, is young people's access to this information, which is just, you know, a fingertip away. And, of course, it can now, of course, spread like wildfire.
How do you keep a handle on it as an educator?
I'm very glad you asked that question, actually, because when I listened to your introduction just now, one of the things that I noticed is that you didn't mention the role and the responsibility of the school, which actually, for my colleagues and I in the American section where we teach, is actually a very intrinsic part of our overall curriculum for the kids, because we realize that when these young people, as they start to grow up, one of the most important things, first of all, is their need and their ability to distinguish the wheat from the chaff, to be able to make, you know, intelligent decisions, to think critically. And one of the ways that they have to be able to do this, that they can do this, of course, is to be able to distinguish the fake news, the conspiracy, from, of course, the truth. So we're constantly teaching them from very, very early age, actually. It can start as early as the primary school and right up through terminal, right up through being seniors in high school, because we want these young people to leave our school equipped and ready to be able to understand how the world works and to be able to really figure out what the truth is and to know to check their sources, just as a good journalist would do.
There's been criticism, by the way, of the survey, Fabrice Epelboin. Some saying that the answers, the questions were a little bit skewed, that you didn't have the option to
introduce some kind of nuance.
Among
the question, you mix together a question like, is the Earth flat, which is really a funny conspiracy theory, and questions like, does secret services, Western secret services, have a link and manipulate extremist group, which can be heavily discussed. And mixing all this together is not a really, scientifically speaking, it's not very serious.
It's not very serious. And your students, do they believe in conspiracy theories more than before?
No,
less than before?
No. But my students are in their 20s and are in very high-end prestigious schools, so they, of course, know that there's nothing like a flat Earth or chemtrails. But still, they're actively looking for the truth, and they're actively looking for a truth that is not revealed by the media. They have the same distrust toward medias and toward politics as everyone in this generation, and that's the root of everything that we're talking about here.
In your book, Cause, you give one example, which is inner cities where there's lots of African Americans or other minorities, and they say there's a conspiracy on to gentrify the neighborhood, to force them out and put, you know, higher end housing for whites. And, well, actually, these become self-fulfilling prophecies. So are they conspiracy theories?
I started writing about conspiracy theories expecting to be critical of them in the way that we all are. I'd been doing a lot of research around the World Trade Center, and year after year gotten more and more of those folks who wanted to tell me their version of the real story. What I found was that the conspiracy theories sort of broke into two groups. The ones that we're talking about, the assassination of JFK or something like that, is an event, and people try to walk it back in history so that it can meet an ideological commitment they have. If JFK was assassinated and you're suspicious of the CIA, then it must be the CIA. If you don't like the Cubans, it must have been the Cubans. And if you don't like the Mafia, it must have been the Mafia. The ones that we saw in urban areas were forward-looking. And essentially what they did would take patterns of behavior by powerful people who were very far away from the folks who believed in these conspiracy theories. And that's why you got, you know, residents of Washington, D.C. in the 1970s when money and power and white folks were leaving the city in droves saying they're going to take over our neighborhoods. And lots of urbanists said, that's impossible. Well, Washington, D.C. now has some of the most expensive real estate in the country, and neighborhoods that were African-American for decades are becoming increasingly white. So it's not about getting to a predetermined destination or an ideological explanation. It's about understanding patterns. And in some ways, what the other guests were saying is the key there. Conspiracy theories are often about people wanting to think critically and be skeptical, which we want to support. Sometimes they do it well, and sometimes they go off the rails.
Sometimes they do well, sometimes they go off the rails. And in the U.S., is there a ratcheting up of conspiracy theories?
I think so. for one thing, as more and more people believe a conspiracy, you can start to feel naive if you don't. So lots of people think that somebody else killed Kennedy or that there's a real story behind the September 11th attacks, because if they don't say that, they're going to feel like they're, a sop for the conventional story. But also I think it's challenging when the commander-in-chief, who's got so much time in the press, goes promoting what are essentially conspiracy theories about Muslims celebrating on September 11th or something like that.
Davina, Frau Meggs, your thoughts? And in that report, by the way, we did see what some would say are not conspiracy theories about vaccines. And these are life-threatening decisions.
You're right, and I think conspiracy theories are a sign of something else, in fact, and it's a sign of an incredible fear of people and their mistrust in something that they used to trust, which is the media, because we created media basically to survey our environment. And we've had real disillusions about the media and about the reference media, the elite media, and we've had disillusions also with politicians. And so I think I'm going to defend people who build conspiracy theories, because they're very clever, in fact. It takes time. It takes intelligence to build a theory that is credible, that plays with each other's fears and tries to maybe create critical thinking. So what does it mean that there is such a success of these theories right now? I think it's really an alarm that we should hear, an alarm system that our understanding of democracy and of our use of media traditionally has changed. And we have to move to the new paradigm that is proposed by the social media. It's an information disorder they're creating, like everything else in society. And this information disorder is claiming to be public, to be debated, so that things that are hidden and that conspiracy theories are about come out, that people actually bring a public debate where this is aired and where maybe some responses at last about who killed JFK, why there is this suspicion that maybe it was made in a Hollywood movie, The Landing on the Moon, etc., etc., that we get the information, because it must be out there somewhere,
This disorder that you described, wasn't that what we saw in the streets of Paris at the time of the French Revolution, when you'd have these pamphleteers, right, who would ratchet out these rags in a lot of cases that would peddle in rumors and conspiracy theories? Yes,
and what they're trying to do, they were trying to rally people. It's about social connection. It's really a phenomenon of communication, and people acting horizontally because they don't believe anymore the connections made vertically by the elite, by the decision makers. And so I think we have to take this seriously.
But is that a good or a bad thing, what you're describing? A healthy skepticism of authority, or is it undermined our society?
I think our societies did nicely at undermining themselves in the pre-digital world, and we're continuing. So maybe it's a sign that we need to question, and we need to use the actual potential of the networks, the social media, etc., to somewhere construct networks of exchange where different contradictory debates and vision of truth emerge. Because what the media before that have done is polarize us. And I think people are fed up with polarization, with having to be on the extremes constantly, because the norm of objectivity that has been the reference norm for the media has become dead. It's about objective is about putting one extreme point against another extreme point of view. And this is not where the truth is. Very often the truth is muddled. The truth is fuzzy. And that's what these guys out there are telling us, some of them. Now, fake news, I would say, is still a different thing, because it has a malignant intention, and it is about really information sovereignty of nations and countries that is being threatened, and we have proof of that.
And we'll talk more about fake news in a moment. But let me ask Adrian Covington about something with the students, because I've heard over the years teachers complain, middle school and high school students, they're less and less interested in politics. They don't care about what's going on in the world. Now it seems like that's not the case when we're looking at conspiracy theories. They are interested in the world.
Definitely. But again, we have to make sure that their interest in the world, well, that they know how to pursue the truth to a legitimate end, to being informed. Because, for example, you were mentioning the tracts from the French Revolution. That was basically, that was driven by an agenda. That was, you know, was propaganda to get people to, you know, on the side of the revolutionaries, for example. The conspiracy theory, I mean, I'm fascinated by what you're saying, Davina, because I'm asking myself while I'm listening to all of this and thinking about my students is what need does a conspiracy theory fulfill? Why do people believe in conspiracy theories? Fake news is different. That has a politically driven agenda. But a conspiracy is a very different thing. And in the case of the kids, I guess we could say it's peer pressure. It's wanting to belong. It's they consider it being grown up. They have their own, you know, individual thoughts, particularly if they're, or especially if they're in conflict with what their parents believe or this kind of thing. It's a very different thing.
So are you reassured, Adrian, saying that, yes, there's a lot of conspiracy theories among the...
Well, interest, I don't know a lot,
interest in it among teenagers, but then when they get to be the age where they're attending Fabrice Appelboin's classes, by that time it's all subsided.
That may be a testament to the quality of teaching that Fabrice does. I think he's doing a good job.
It has only to do with the school where I teach.
I think that you know, conspiracy theories have an attraction that reaches much farther than that, and you know, people look for meaning, and particularly for you know, dramatic and horrible events that affect us a great deal emotionally, but may not have meaning. Politically, ideologically, sometimes conspiracy theories can come in and fill that gap. You know, an assassination that's the work of someone who suffers from mental illness can get recast as something that is a conspiracy of the highest order.
All right, we're gonna pick up on this point when we come back, and talk about how France is tackling not conspiracy theories but fake news. You're watching the France 24 debate.
You might watch France 24 in English, but don't forget, France 24 is also broadcast in French, Arabic, and Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Available on cable and satellite systems and online media in France and around the world.
We are journalists, and normally you have to listen to us, but you have things to tell us too. Maybe you've experienced a dramatic event, or you've got something important to say. You want to make a difference. That is why we created The Observers. Now, the first step is very easy. You get in touch with our team. Send us your images, tell us what you've seen. And then it's our job to get your voice out there, on our site, on social networks, on your mobiles and tablets, and on TV, of course. You can appear in our weekly show via webcam. Or perhaps we'll come see you in person, where you live, in your country, your town, and we'll work together on a report for our investigative show, The Observers Direct. So you get the idea. This show is your show, your way to get your voice out to the world.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. Hours after the end of a 4-month ceasefire, Colombian ELN rebels target oil and gas installations at a military base. They've now called for renewed talks with the government, who's pulled out its mediators. The White House calls it outrageous, a federal court's decision to suspend plans to deport so-called dreamers, those who grew up as undocumented children in the United States. However, President Trump does hint that there could be further negotiations. Tunisia braced for another night of protests. The standoff over New Year's cost of living increases has sparked violence and dozens of arrests. French feminists, including the junior minister for gender equality, speak out against a right to flirt petition by women who include iconic actress Catherine Deneuve in that petition, denounced as the puritanism and man-hating, they say, born of the Weinstein scandal. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're reacting to a news cycle that includes a survey here in France that claims that more and more French believe in conspiracy theories. We're talking about it with Davina Frau-Meggs, who teaches media sociology at the University of Paris Sorbonne Nouvelle, and who is a member of the European Commission's ad hoc panel on fake news. Fake news, we'll talk more about that in a moment. So, as well with us as well is Adrian Covington, co-director of the American section of the Lycée International in Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Welcome back as well to Greg Smith-Simon, the author of Cause and How It Doesn't Always Equal Effects, which hits the bookstores next month. And Fabrice Epelboin, who lectures at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, co-founder of the internet security consultants Yogosha, cybersecurity consultants, more to be more precise. Fabrice, the conspiracy theories, in part one of our discussion, Greg Smith-Simon said there are those where an event happens and you're trying to figure out what it all means and making the difference between things that are, how do you put it, forward-looking? What's the...
Yeah, sort of reverse engineering or looking forward.
And you brought up the point about how there are times plots that are real.
Yeah, of course. I've been investigating surveillance technology from 2008 to 2000, or quite recently, 3 years ago. And it was a short period of my life where I was a journalist, which was pretty pleasant, except that until Snowden, I was officially labeled as a conspiracy theorist because I was revealing that we were all under surveillance, which is today common knowledge. But in 2010, it wasn't common knowledge. And the state, of course, didn't want people to know that. So they were using a very simple tactic, which was labeling those who were telling the truth as conspiracy theorists. And it worked, because basically nobody really realized what was going on. And today it's definitely too late to do anything about it. So using the term conspiracy theory is kind of tricky. There are also
so what's a better definition, you think?
The best definition is to seek the truth. And when you have something labeled as conspiracy theory, check the fact. The Earth is not flat. That's pretty easy to verify. The CIA kill Kennedy? That's not as easy to verify as the Earth is flat. When it comes to vaccine, that's quite easy to verify. But when it comes to secret services meddling with extremist groups like ISIS, that can really be discussed. And putting all this in with the same label, which is those are conspiracy theory, is. We should have a more precise way of classifying conspiracy theory. I mean, chemtrails are ridiculous. The Earth being flat is ridiculous. Other conspiracy theory, like who killed Kennedy, we need some serious investigation on this.
You heard a damning indictment, Adrian Covington, in part one of our discussion by Davina Frau-Meggs, who says part of the problem is that the old school a way of examining ideas is you present the argument for, you present the argument against, and then you have some kind of synthesis. And actually, people realize that there isn't necessarily for or against, and therefore that's what breeds, to a certain degree, this theory that there's something we're hiding from us.
No, and I feel that educators are actually in the front lines on this one. Because actually, you know, we were saying this earlier on as well. The kids used to have the encyclopedias at home. The parents watched one of 3 news channels, subscribed to a national newspaper and the local newspaper, and that was pretty much everybody's access to world information. And we all, you know, at least speaking from my own upbringing in the United States, is pretty much what we were all used to. But now, of course, in the classroom, we realize that we have to help the kids manage and understand, again, the remarkable and actually unprecedented, in all of human history, the unprecedented access to information that the typical 12-year-old has. So actually it's a fascinating process. Google, for example, we teach them how to, to search, but also to be aware of the echo chamber effect, which is to say that based on your own particular research and interests, Google will bring back to you, give back to you whatever it is that you were looking up. So
are kids getting more sophisticated? They now realize, hey, the algorithm is skewed so that if I click on ice hockey, there'll be pictures
that's
of...
among the thing I teach at Sciences Po, and they're really aware of that. Either
at your age group.
Facebook algorithm or Google.
It's taken a while, but now they get it.
They do realize that you can create addiction by creating user interface, and you can teach that to kids, and they really realize because they're all addicted to their smartphone.
Totally.
So when you teach them how you can code addiction within a user interface, they're really fascinated by that. When you do some very simple experiments, like take two kids in the same classroom coming from two different countries and ask them to search a specific term and observe how the results are different, because those kids come from different culture, different background, different search history, and they have a different profile on Google. And Google is feeding them very different results. That's very easy to do in a classroom, and that's really enlightening for kids because they realize that they're not they're not equal when they search. They're not equal when they're using Facebook, and that
they're not being fed the same information.
They're not being fed the same information, and that Facebook is not about linking people together. There's an algorithm in the middle that does really things that create this polarity between extreme.
It's not easy to do that.
Well, I teach with
really
smart kids.
Great
My
for you to
kids are
say
smart.
that, but I think we have to be very activist about real media and information literacy in the schools from the beginning.
The beginning,
Yeah.
absolutely.
To the end.
No,
This should
totally.
be taught
Yeah.
first
This,
grade.
no, totally.
Basically, my kids are 20 and
It should be taught in first grade.
It definitely
Yeah.
should be
Elementary
taught
school
at the
level.
earliest
Yeah.
age. It should be
I
taught when the
totally
kids have a Facebook account.
Now, the argument
They
over
have Facebook at age 13.
the argument over conspiracy theories, fake news, coming amid fresh debate over what you were just mentioning, the addiction to screens. Two big shareholders at Apple have sent this week the board of directors a letter urging the company to take action. In it, they say most notably that that there are the average American teenager who uses a smartphone receives her first phone at age 10, spends over 4.5 hours a day on it. 78% of teens check their phones at least hourly, and 50% report feeling addicted to their phones. It would defy common sense to argue that this level of usage by children whose brains are still developing is not having at least some impact, or that the maker of such a powerful product has no role to play in helping parents to ensure it being used optimally. Is it Apple's responsibility to deal with our screen addiction? By the way, it's not just children who are addicted to screens. Is it Apple's responsibility? Is it parents' responsibility? Is it the government's responsibility?
It's a shared responsibility, I would say, because the issue is too huge to put the onus on only one group. So we have technologies of the screen now that are in a push approach. So they're really putting a lot of pressure on everybody, parents, grandparents, to own these machines, to give them to children, to the point that I think today Americans have reached about 11 hours in front of screens, which is more than sleep.
And all these hours
really
in
a problem of health.
all these hours in front of the screens, does it fuel the mindset that is prone to conspiracy theories?
We have
Depends on how much time you are on the conspiracy theories themselves.
It definitely has an impact on the way your brain is going to structure itself during teenage years. It does have an impact. We can measure that. But the real impact on are those kids going to believe in conspiracy theory or not? We don't know that yet.
But there's definitely the need to civilize this. We've all landed on this. It's changing all the time. And so we have to build defense mechanism or positive defense mechanisms about when to use, how to use, what barriers we put with our private life, etc. And so that happens in the house. That's the parents. It happens in the schools. It's the teachers. It happens in front of the machines themselves. So they have to help. These Facebook and the GAFAMs have to help in that. That's why I'm in favor of a very systemic approach.
You mentioned in your book at one point how you have students who are all sitting across from one another on their phones, and You're saying this is pathetic, but they're saying, oh no, we're all conversing with other people at the same time.
I assumed that meant that they had less of a social interaction. They said, no, if there are 3 people at the table, but they're each talking to 6 people, then you've got a much larger conversation, not a smaller one. I'm not sure that I'm ready to believe that, but I think it's certainly true that there's not any going back. It's hard to find research on how people act when you take their cell phones away. I suspect it would almost be unethical to do that to anyone, or no one would volunteer.
You compare it to being put in solitary confinement in a prison.
Yes, yeah. People's behaviors when you take their phones away are consistent with solitary confinement, which is extraordinarily dangerous for your mental health. I think the tie-in to things like conspiracy theories is to remember that, what we know socially. We rarely know anything well enough on our own to take action. If you're in an area where there's a risk of flooding, you probably won't leave your house by yourself. You'll leave your house when everybody in your neighborhood leaves the house and decides to evacuate.
Hence the success of social media, because they create communities. They don't create just audiences. They create communities of people who help each other, talk to each other, try to figure out things on each other.
And virtual communities. Actually, that's for me what's so intriguing about all of this. Because one of the things that also I share with my colleagues is we have to realize that those of us, again, in the classroom are students, particularly, let's just say, this year's batch of 12-year-olds, the ones entering CZM. I mean, these guys, it is safe to assume that the majority of these kids have spent more time in a virtual world than in the real world. I mean, a play date now, it used to be sitting on the floor playing with toys and dolls and trucks and things. And now, very often, it can really be heartbreaking to see the kids, each one shows up with his or her iPad, and they spend the afternoon just scrolling through their iPads. So this aspect of living in a virtual world and the possibility, the potential for conspiracies just sort of, going haywire, going out of control, because we're talking about virtual communities, and who knows who's feeding them. Right? I mean, it could be somebody who's promoting a conspiracy who actually, in and of themselves, they don't believe it. That's a conspiracy in and of itself.
Yeah, and there's been the whole arguments about people who've been radicalized, that it's easy to shut yourself in your bedroom and you're more isolated and you're more prone to these conspiracies.
You can isolate yourself just using Google. Yeah. The bubble effect, the echo chamber effect on Google is enough to isolate yourself. And Facebook algorithm is enough to isolate yourself within a community of people who share the same values, who share the same stories, and who share the same conspiracy theory. Yeah. So you have a whole bunch of algorithms out there who are willing to isolate yourself, either with yourself or with the same kind of people, which is another kind of isolation.
All right, we're our panel making the distinction between conspiracy theories and fake news which is driven with an ill intent. Now, the French president last week promising a bill to fight fake news to be introduced in the coming months.
During electoral periods on internet platforms, content will not follow the same rules. As you know, powerful promotions of fake news on social media only cost a few €1,000 and can be carried out in complete anonymity. The platforms will therefore be required to be transparent about sponsored content so that the identity of the advertisers and those who control them become public, but also to limit the amount of such content on sites.
All right, so election broadcast rules that apply for mainstream media like ours should also apply on the internet. He says you should have better flagging of sponsored content. Is that going to work, Davina Framix?
Well, I think the question that is raised here is a question I've raised for a long time, is these platforms are media. At the moment, they're treated in American law as common carriers, which is to say, no looking at content. But the audiovisual, YouTube, etc., should make them under the public trustee status, where there are.
And the French president says he's going to regulate. Can he?
I think the questions he raises can be raised. They have to be balanced with issues of freedom of expression. And that's this balance that is going to be very hard to do by law. Yes. and where maybe the regulation should be about co-regulation, about helping all the actors to come around the table and come together about how far transparency, how far anonymity, etc. So I think I would be more cautious, and I don't know that a law would do it on itself. We have laws in France that take care of that. La loi de diffamation, la loi de la presse. They may be needing to upgrade, but a law, I think, would need a lot of discussion, and it might be a good opportunity for this public debate I'm asking for on these issues. But I think GAFAMs are media, therefore they should be given a status of media. We have to invent that status, because they're not like the traditional media. There's interaction, etc. on top. So we have to be creative, just the way they are, in terms of co-regulation, etc.
So, Greg Smith-Simon, if you're a betting man, the chances of Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc., agreeing to a status of being a proper media?
They're asking for it. Facebook has recognized that in 2017.
After having their arm twisted after
fake news.
Before Trump's
I
election.
would say that those companies voluntarily doing something is unlikely. That you can talk about regulation as a way to do it. Coming from the U.S., I'm coming from context where there's very little regulation. We don't have the same.
Because regulation, at the end of the day, it's what Fabrice Epelboin was talking about. It's the secret sauce in the algorithm that directs you towards this website or that website.
Or just, as an American, it's difficult for me to figure out what you would count as fake news. As a sociologist, I can say that Donald Trump's racist and he uses the politics of racism to promote his agenda. But I could imagine he would be deeply offended by that, and if he had the ability to challenge someone on a fake news story, would take offense at anybody saying that about him. So, as always, and I know that France has more experience with this, adjudicating those sorts of questions of fake news, I think would quickly get more complicated than we imagine.
That's why I advocate also for public service of the internet. Because if we can't regulate the existing GAFAMs, why not create a spot, a place, another platform that would have the quality demands that we have with public service. You're on France 24. You're very careful about who you invite, don't you? So have a place where, when in doubt, because we don't have the time to verify. It's very nice to say sources, go back, credibility, but that's a job. That's most people, most users, most young people, we don't have time to verify this fake news. So where do we go as a safe place to do that? The encyclopedia?
Well, here at France 24, we have the Observer's website, which takes stories and looks at them to see whether or not they're real or fake, and follows up on them. Several of the other news media outlets do the same. Greg Smith-Simon?
I was just going to say that I don't think that we need to be nostalgic for the days of a much narrower range of opinion before the internet. To take an easy example, all of the politics of, say, the French Socialist Party, which would be mainstream here, were outside the realm of discussion in the United States in the days when we had 3 networks. So the possibility that we can have these broader discussions and form communities that promote other sorts of ideas, that's exciting. It just means that there's a lot of work to be done. The job's not done once you put out those ideas.
And the problem is that doing a law just in France doesn't make sense, because we're dealing with a media whose specificity is trans-border. So we have to extend the debate to other nations and other cultures.
Part of what used to be the education, looking for knowledge, is now in the hands of Google. Part of the way society...
What, with Google Books, or just simply with their search engine?
The search engine. You have a question, you need knowledge, you ask Google. You used to ask your teacher. Part of what structures the society, the French society, is now in the hands of Facebook. Those are foreign companies obeying to foreign laws. If I have a conflict with Facebook, I have to put my conflict in the jurisdiction of Cupertino in the United States, in California. I'm not going to sue Facebook in France. So when Emmanuel Macron wants to regulate this, he is basically not in his jurisdiction. Those are American powers obeying to American values, like the First Amendment. And the First Amendment is nothing in France. Lots of things that you can see on Facebook fall under the First Amendment. And if you ask Facebook to censor them, they're going to be really shocked. because in the United States, saying certain thing is totally acceptable, whereas in France, it's a huge scandal, and it will eventually fall under the term fake news.
All right, so the United States still
we
owning
lack some
the internet, and we need to have more.
Totally lost our digital.
There needs to be more sovereignty here on this.
Information sovereignty, national sovereignty,
digital. We totally lost that. We don't have it anymore, and we won't have it anytime soon.
Yeah. All right, and unfortunately, we also need more sovereignty when it comes to the clock, which we've run out of time on. Adrian Covington, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well. I want to thank as well Fabrice Epel-Boin, Greg Smith-Simon, Davina Frau, Megs. Stay with us though. Media Watch is next.
Yes, right, we do.
And we say hello to someone who, on a daily basis, sorts the wheat from the chaff.
Gosh,
James Creedon.
You're giving me a lot of credit, but I'll try. In any case, what has emerged here in France with that study vis-a-vis how much belief there is in conspiracy theories. There have been similar studies conducted in the UK and in the US, where, of course, with the Brexit vote and with the election of Donald Trump, there was a concern that the way in which news was being spread, or people's beliefs in problems, conspiracy theories, essentially, could have contributed to those results. So this is a piece in The Guardian, going back a couple of months, by Hugo Drocon, who is a politics lecturer at the University of Cambridge, and they conducted a study along with YouGov, which showed that really over 50% of people believe in at least one conspiracy theory, both in the UK and in the US. And I think the takeaway, I suppose, analysis that he provides in this article is the following. It is not conspiracy theories that are the cause of disenchantment with democracy, but the other way around, disenchantment with democracy that leads to conspiracy theories. And actually, they conducted a study across Europe, and it shows that the countries, for example, Sweden, where you have more democracy and less inequality, the countries that are more democratic and less unequal have 4 times less belief in conspiracy theories than those that are less democratic and more unequal, and they have Portugal as an example of that. So 4 times less conspiracy theory belief in countries like that. So that's a pretty striking statistic, I would say. I just wanted to add, of course, all of the different websites, sub-websites, whatnot, that are trying to fact-check, because that is, of course, a response to the conspiracy theory and fake news phenomena. Les Décodeurs for Le Monde, which was a part of the website, but it's now been kind of shifted over onto Facebook and Twitter more. So sorting through and verifying and fact-checking news as it emerges, or fake news. Hoaxbuster is another one, hoaxbuster.com. These are more on in the French media landscape. You also have Desintox for Libération. So a lot of media now are really putting in place this sort of service, if you like, for the public. Whether or not people who are tempted to believe in conspiracy theories will ever go to a service like this is another question, I suppose. And of course, there is the issue of Facebook and how social media are going to respond to this. And indeed, prior to the presidential election last time round, they did offer, as a new offering to users, to signal what users would consider to be fake news, and then it would be investigated. But it might have not have gone far enough for what Emmanuel Macron, of course, has recently said in terms of a fight back against fake news.
Fight back against fake news, and I'm struck again what you're describing illustrates what Davina Frau said at the outset, and this, certain TV channels which preface almost every story with "this is what the mainstream media won't tell you," or "this is what the mainstream media is hiding from you."
Yes, conspiracy theory about the media, and it really requires, I think, the profession to ask themselves where they've gone wrong and what kind of ethics they can put back in there. But the profession per se is not, I wouldn't say guilty, this is not a question of guilt, but it's the whole structure that pushes journalists to go fast, to click before they check. And online, there's a specific environment where you click before you think, because you think and you know that you can correct almost right away. Except that the people who've read the first information might not read it again when you've corrected it. And so it's a whole ethics of new journalists, I think, and online journalists, to stop behaving the way they do when they're on their personal accounts, where they can tweet, etc., etc. We've seen in research that the most influencers that spread fake news most are the reference media, because they are the most consulted. So if they say something wrong, a lot of people will retweet it. So this is just enormous, and that's why you need research to figure out what's happening under, because everybody speaks about the content. I say the novelty about fake news is that it's content plus the amount of interactions plus the fact that some malevolent rogue countries or groups, etc., don't aim just at that fake news. They also try to get people into these confirmation biases, into communities that think like them, etc., etc. They have a long-range, long-term pattern. This is where we have to be very careful about democracy.
Adrian Covington, you're a social studies teacher. Are your students fighting back against this as well? Are they conscious of this?
I love my students, but we can't give them too much credit for being, good, independent thinkers. And that's really, again, what education is all about. We have to recognize that, these kids are in our charge from the age of, 4 till 18. And take nothing for granted. In other words, always assume that they will, even if we love them, going to make the wrong decision when it comes to discerning correctly about a historical lesson, history lesson, or the news that's out there. And again, just constantly from the earliest age, right up and through the, till graduation, hammering home the message every single year. This is, again, what my colleagues and I do, is making sure that they have the toolbox, that they understand how it is that they have to be good journalists themselves. They have to constantly go back to the source and ask themselves, is this the right?
Check the facts. That'll be our final word. I want to thank James Creighton. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.